Hi, it's Katrina. New Egyptian tomb. Archaeologists have announced the discovery of a tomb full of what look like hundreds of spooky dolls. The new tomb was found in Luxor's West Bank at the Dra Abul Naga Necropolis. According to information from the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities, the tomb dates back to the 18th dynasty and is one of the largest burial sites in the area. But what looks like dolls to us are not dolls at all, but Ushabti statues. The tomb is pretty unique, full of 365 Ushabti statues left inside the man's tomb. Ushabti statues were carved into the likeness of mummies, usually mummified humans with their arms crossed over their chests. Each one was carefully crafted by hand, and there were 365 placed into a person's tomb, representing each day of the year. Each Ushabti was able to come to life, one per day, to help the deceased in whatever tasks they were required to do in the afterlife. Many of these figurines were decorated with agricultural implements, since the Egyptians thought even in death, you had to keep on farming for your food. Only when dead, the statues would come to life and do it for you. It's not clear exactly who was buried in this tomb or why they deserved so many magical servants in the afterlife. Another coffin found here was carved in the shape of a person dating back to the 17th dynasty. Inside the coffin was the mummy of a 15 or 16-year-old girl resting on her side, wearing earrings, many beaded necklaces, and some other jewelry. Someone took the time to try to carve her face into the lid, but it's probably not really what she looked like. Nearby were some sandals that were incredibly well preserved for being 3,600 years old. As the excavations continue at the necropolis, archaeologists are hopeful they'll find even more tombs to lure tourists back to Egypt and solve some of the mysteries of Dra Abul Naga. Ritual burials. 26 skeletons have been found in southern England, and they are creeping out the local archaeologists. Well, I don't know. They kind of like that stuff. It all happened while a new water pipeline was being excavated. Nobody had anticipated ancient burial pits to interrupt the city work. So far, the oldest of the burials has been dated back 3,000 years. While archaeologists can't say for sure who was buried here, they did say that there could be a connection between these 26 skeletons and the ancient people who built hill forts in the area thousands of years ago. The same people who carved the 360-foot figure known as the Uffington White Horse into a nearby hillside. The White Horse was made from chalk, carved in the top of the hill in the shape of a horse thousands of years ago by an unidentified group of humans. But things get creepier as we dig deeper into the burials. Neil Holbrook from the Cotswold Archaeology team said the graves look suspiciously like other burial pits found from the Iron Age that were used in primitive sacrifices. Plus, archaeologists also uncovered the remains of dwellings, ancient tools, and scraps of pottery. Some of the archaeologists believe the pits here were used in ritual burials, probably with sacrificed humans and possibly animals. Unfortunately, even though the local experts suspect ritual burials, they don't really know what the rituals were. Many of the ancient people who lived in what is today the United Kingdom practiced sacrifices, but scientists don't actually know why they were so fixated on offering living people to their gods. The Dismembered. The disturbing remains of a young child have been puzzling experts for over 100 years. It's not the remains themselves that are so mysterious, but rather the strange markings that were found on them. On the jaw of a child who was only 5 years old when they died, scientists identified strange markings that suggest either cannibalism or ritualistic activity. The skeleton of the young boy was found in El Castillo Cave, which is part of the Altamira Caves in Spain, the place in Europe with some of the oldest proof of humanity, as well as some of the oldest prehistoric cave paintings. German paleontologist Hugo Obermeier and his team found the jawbone in 1912, but they didn't give it much thought. The First World War broke out and it ended up being stuck in a museum collection. It was lent out to another museum and then lost until a team of researchers tracked it down. The indentations identified on the bone show that something bad happened to this child. In the cave near where the child was found, the team had also found small fragments of a cranium and the teeth of 2 other people. The analysis of the child's bone suggests he was a Homo sapiens, though with more primitive features such as bigger teeth and a smaller chin. The child's tongue was removed after death with some sharp implement, so archaeologists have been trying to figure out why. At that time, there was no shortage of food, so why would they want to eat him? It is the only clear case of this practice anywhere in Western Europe. Was it part of some spooky cannibal ritual, or was there something even more nefarious going on in Spain 27,000 years ago? Skeletons at the beach. On the coast of Wales in the United Kingdom, a storm unveiled something very spooky. It all began in 2014 during a series of brutal storms. The locals started noticing that there were pale bones sticking out of the sand on the beach. As this went on, it became clear that there were hundreds of skeletons hidden right beneath their feet. For decades, the locals had been walking over a literal burial ground, with their kids playing in the sand and nobody the wiser. Once it was confirmed that the beach was riddled with the corpses of the dead, archaeologists were called in to deal with the situation. Archaeologists found not just a few dozen, but a couple hundred skeletons dating back to the medieval era. Excavations were done in 2014, and then every year until 2021. Archaeologists are now confident enough to say that on the beach here between the 8th and 11th centuries, there was a Christian community. They lived right here on the shore and were apparently burying their dead behind their local cemetery, which in modern times turned out to be a popular family beach. In total, 210 burials have been found so far. However, there was an unusual lack of artifacts. A few pieces of amber, a couple of pins, but nothing really noteworthy. There was also a large number of female and infant burials, over half, though archaeologists can't say why. They also don't know what happened to the seaside village that had an overwhelming female death rate. Shark attack victim. The victim of a shark attack was recently discovered thanks to researchers from Oxford University. But this guy wasn't attacked by a shark while surfing in Australia or Florida. Instead, he was brutally killed by a shark 3,000 years ago while swimming off the coast of Japan. His body is the earliest evidence of a shark attacking a human. Through painstaking research, the international team of scientists was able to recreate the exact situation that caused this poor guy's violent death. The discovery came about while the researchers were investigating violent trauma on prehistoric hunter-gatherers stored at the Kyoto University in Japan. These are remains that have been dug up from ancient sites over the past century or so. They came upon one guy riddled with very obvious injuries, and researchers knew immediately that he must have been attacked by a shark. He had what the researchers called serrated injuries, approximately 790 of them. He had been gnawed on pretty good by the shark, then buried at the Tsukumo Shell Cemetery site with other people from his tribe. After the investigation, the team concluded that this guy died sometime around 1370 BC and was alive when he was attacked. They even found that his left hand had been sheared off completely, probably as he tried to fight the beast away. He was also missing his right and left leg, which were buried on top of his body. However, scientists don't know if he was actually out hunting for sharks and got killed by one, or if he just happened to be going for a swim. Satanic Symbols. Archaeologists investigating the ruins of Ostia Antica near Rome made a very unpleasant discovery when they stumbled upon some satanic symbols. The excavation was led by a team of American and Canadian experts searching the ruins of a Roman home, one that likely belonged to a prominent member of society. It dates back to the 4th century AD and is located near an old mausoleum which is also 2,000 years old. But that doesn't mean that the symbols are that old. The archaeological site was closed for the winter. When they arrived in the summer to reopen the dig, they found that a group of vandals had shown up and scrawled satanic messages all over the ruins. Things like 666 were carved into the ancient stone, not only ruining the archaeological value of the structure, but also freaking out the archaeologists. Even more bizarre is that the ruins were littered with feathers from birds and leftover bonfires. The archaeologists are pretty sure that while the site was closed, a group of local Satan worshippers took it over and used it for their rituals. It's not clear if they actually tried to summon the devil or some other demons, but they were definitely up to something, and it involved sacrificing dozens of birds. Bird skull in the mouth. Speaking of birds, the skeleton of a child with something very strange in its mouth was recently found in a cave in Poland. The skull of a small bird was found inside the child's mouth, a chaffinch bird to be exact, and another one right beside the child's cheek. Anthropologists haven't been able to figure out why the child was left in such a spooky condition after dying several hundred years ago. The discovery was made in Tunel Velki cave. The kid was buried all alone. The only other human remains found inside the cave were dated to around 4,500 years old, significantly older than the bones of the child. This suggests that the cave wasn't really used for burials. The child is also the only modern human found buried in a cave anywhere in the region. This would be a pretty big mystery on its own, but it gets even more bizarre when taking into consideration archaeologists extracted the skull of a small bird from the child's mouth. What could this possibly mean? We don't really have an answer. According to Science Alert, radiocarbon dating has placed the death of the child sometime in the late 18th century, around 300 years ago. They died at the young age of 10, though they had been suffering from extreme malnutrition before their death. This is as far as it goes in terms of solving the case, as the bird head, the lonely burial, and all the rest is still a hopelessly creepy mystery. Sacred chickens. Experts have come to a rather weird conclusion having to do with ancient chickens in Britain. According to a new study, researchers have shown that ancient chickens lived much longer than modern chickens. Why? Because our ancient ancestors thought chickens were sacred. They never thought of these small birds as food, but rather as animals to be revered. But it wasn't all fun and games. During the Iron Age, chickens were kept alive to be ritually sacrificed or to prove their worth in the cockfighting arena. For some strange reason, nobody thought about using them for food or even to produce eggs. Research has shown that today, the average chicken in the United Kingdom lives for between 33 and 81 days. But during the Iron Age, during the Roman occupation, and even into the more recent Saxon period, chickens lived to be up to 4 years old. The results came from testing 123 dead chickens found buried throughout the United Kingdom. Almost none of them showed evidence of butchery, and almost all of them were buried as complete skeletons, the same way a person would be buried. But as for why the ancient people of Britain thought chickens were sacred, well, that's a mystery nobody has managed to solve. Twin Viking babies. Archaeologists have just discovered the remains of a pair of Viking babies, possibly twins, near the small town of Sigtuna in Sweden. These babies date back about 1,000 years. They were uncovered inside a tomb along with 4 adults and 2 other children. Researchers say this is some of the first evidence of a family Christian burial after the Vikings were converted to the new religion. Archaeologists know this because 1,000 years ago, it was a pretty turbulent time for religion in Europe. It's easy to tell today which religion a group followed based on how they were buried. For example, people who still followed the original beliefs of the Vikings were cremated. You've probably heard of a Viking burial, being pushed out to sea on a boat and lit on fire, or at least upon a funeral pyre. However, those who had converted to Christianity were buried on their backs. In addition to the Viking babies, coal deposits were also found, as well as some scraps of burned coffins. This suggests the Vikings weren't quite done with their pyromaniac ways of life, but had managed to incorporate fire with the Christian burials. The world's oldest ritual. One of the most startling archaeological discoveries of the last few years involves the oldest ritual in the world. Professor Sheila Coulson from the University of Oslo has discovered evidence that Homo sapiens were performing rituals in Africa 70,000 years ago. The discovery came while the professor was studying the San people, a group of ancient humans still living in a remote part of Botswana. While investigating artifacts from the Stone Age in the hills of the Kalahari Desert known as the Mountains of the Gods, Sheila found a small cave so secluded that it had barely been touched by anyone. Inside of this cave, she found a rock that had been carved into the shape of a python's head. According to her and her group of students, it looked exactly like a real python. Even the way the light reflected over the carved rock made it look as though the stone had snakeskin. Sheila and her team decided to start digging directly in front of the snake's head. They quickly found artifacts that they later dated at 70,000 years old. They found spearheads, tools, and red-painted spear tips that had evidence of burning. All of these artifacts point to some kind of strange snake ritual, only 30,000 years earlier than any other ritual performed on Earth that scientists know about today. Demonic skulls and Nazi briefcase. A team of explorers were out and about in a remote mountain range in Russia when they came across some very strange skulls. These skulls have enormous eye sockets and a strangely curved shape with what look like horns sticking up. The men described the skulls as coming from an alien creature, and they look like nothing ever seen before. In a separate discovery, a hermit nearby found a briefcase in the same forest which has the logo of a secretive Nazi institute founded by Heinrich Himmler in 1935. People immediately made the connection between the briefcase and the skulls. It's a well-known fact that Hitler and his friends were obsessed with the occult and looking for aliens. Many conspiracy websites connected the mysterious skulls with the occultism of the SS institution and concluded the skulls could be from aliens or demons or some sort of dark monster. Paleontologists have dismissed the skulls as just deformed heads, but they look quite real, except nobody knows where they came from. Perhaps some sort of extinct creature? Or something much more sinister is lurking in the Russian woods. Tombs of warrior women. A tomb was recently discovered in Russia with 4 legendary warrior women buried together. The tomb goes back over 2,500 years, and the women buried inside of it belong to the group of nomadic people known as the Scythians. The Scythians were a race of warriors, one of the only ancient civilizations that may have actually resembled the Amazonian warriors from ancient Greek mythology. The Scythians lived in small tribes and wore pants, which was crucial to being able to constantly ride a horse. Boys and girls were trained from an early age to fight with a bow and arrow. Imagine school back then, horseback riding and warfare practically as soon as you were able to walk. About 1/3 of the Scythian women who have been found in burial plots were buried with weapons, with many of them having evidence of war wounds. In total, archaeologist Valery Gulyaev and team found 19 burial mounds near the village of Devitsa. The tomb containing the 4 women spans 3 generations, with the youngest girl found roughly around 12 years old when she died. The other 2 were in their 20s, and the oldest around 50. The grave shows all indications of burial rites used for men also being used for these women. The oldest woman was buried wearing an engraved gold headdress called a kalathos, which was still sitting on her head 2,500 years later. It's the first of its kind ever found in the region. Archaeologists also found iron daggers, spears, a bronze mirror, and jewelry made from glass beads. The official statement says that the woman was buried in the position of a horseman, as if riding a horse for eternity. A dead alien. A dead alien has apparently been found in the middle of nowhere, Russia. At least that's what it looks like in a video uploaded online by All News Web. According to the description in the video, the dead alien was discovered in the Buryatia region of Russia, very near the UFO hotspots deep in Siberia. The film is a bit fuzzy. It shows a pair of Russian men speaking as they walk across a snowy field. They then reveal what is apparently an extraterrestrial being. The creature is small, too small to be a person. It looks kind of shriveled. It has a huge gray head, giant black eyes, and all the telltale markings of a very real monster from outer space. In the video, the Russian men claim that they found the alien about 2 hours before taking the video. They also say that judging by the freezing temperatures, it had been sitting there in the snow for several days. Some people are skeptical about the video, calling it a hoax. But at the same time, others say it could be the proof we've been waiting for that aliens really do exist. There was never any information on what happened to the creature after it was discovered. The video just kind of ended, and that was it. What do you think about this? Let me know in the comments below. Submarine Hideout. Hidden deep in Russian territory is a creepy abandoned submarine hideout that could apparently be used once again if a new world war were to break out. The submarine hideout is a dark maze of tunnels, likely built as a nuclear shelter for submarines by the Soviet Union after the end of the Great War. However, the secret submarine hideout was never actually used. The construction began in the 1960s, gradually slowed in the 1980s as things in the Soviet Union began to fall apart, and was never finished. The tunnels were recently exposed by a group of curious locals from Vladivostok on the far east coast of Siberia. These people explored the network of tunnels and took tons of photographs. The main part of the hideout has 2 giant parallel tunnels joined together by smaller tunnels, with the main ones big enough to hold some of the biggest submarines on the planet today. In total, there are thousands of feet of tunnels. Very strange is that the urban explorers said the background radiation was unusually high, which shouldn't be possible unless the base was hiding some kind of nuclear stockpile, or it had been at some point. Today, the Russian Navy's Great Pacific Fleet is stationed at Vladivostok. It includes at least 1 huge missile carrier, 5 destroyers, and 10 nuclear submarines. If war were to ever break out, this mysterious submarine hideout could finally see some action. The worst part is that it's looking straight across the ocean at Alaska. Castle of Bones. Researchers in Russia have recently uncovered a bizarre structure made from hundreds of bones. 25,000 years ago, a group of primitive hunter-gatherers built their very own castle out of bones. But they didn't use human bones or even deer bones. Instead, they built a giant circular structure out of the skeletal remains of 60 huge mammoths. And to tell you the truth, researchers have no idea why or what purpose the megalithic bone structure could have possibly served. But here's where things get a little strange. Scientists say it isn't the first structure built of mammoth bones found in Russia. In the 1960s and 70s, scientists found other structures that are eerily similar, with one of them about 310 miles from Moscow. Then in 2014, researchers found evidence of this newest structure and began excavations. It took years to uncover the entire thing, and experts now know that this is the oldest and biggest mammoth house anywhere in the country. Experts were able to date the bones back to the Ice Age. The best guess is that Paleolithic people used the structure as a house. They built a huge shelter from bones and probably fashioned its walls from mammoth fur, using the place as a refuge during the brutally harsh Ice Age winters. Back then, the temperatures frequently dropped below 4 degrees Fahrenheit. In total, the mammoth structure consisted of at least 51 mandibles and 64 skulls, along with many other random bones. But some researchers are not convinced it was just a house. Since there are no other animal bones, it implies that people didn't live here. It's exclusively woolly mammoth remains, and Marjolin Bosch, a zoo archaeologist at the University of Cambridge, says it was built to last. Its enormous size implies that it was meant to last as a landmark or some type of meeting place or ceremonial center. There's evidence that people here 25,000 years ago used fire, and it may have been used to dry meat. Whatever the case, it looks like there was a lot going on here, raising many intriguing questions about the people who built this mammoth house. An ancient buried church. A mysterious structure was found buried underground in Russia, and scientists are saying it could be the oldest church in the entire world, although there are some other contenders. This bizarre structure was found near the ancient fortress of Narin Kala, an archaeological site that dates back to around the year 300 AD. Scientists found a cross-shaped structure hidden 36 feet deep under the ground, but unfortunately, the archaeological site is already a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and so archaeologists can't legally excavate the church, meaning its function still remains a mystery. There are a few prime theories. This structure could have served as a reservoir, it may have been a Zoroastrian fire temple, or it could have been a Christian church. This is according to a statement released from the National University of Science and Technology in Russia. Which one do you think it was? To try to get to the bottom of the mystery, researchers implemented special scanners to recreate the underground structure. They used the same scanners that scientists used back in 2017 to find the mysterious void inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. The scans confirmed that the building is shaped like a cross, but it hasn't actually brought researchers any closer to figuring out its purpose. If it really is a church, it could date back to the earliest part of the Common Era, 2,000 years ago. Ancient Necropolis. A unique necropolis was just found near Moscow that dates back 4,500 years ago, to around the same time that the pyramids were being built. The discovery came during an expedition led by Russia's Institute of Archaeology. It was found in the Istra region, with the graves inside the necropolis belonging to people from the mysterious Fatyanovo culture. These were the first farmers who ever lived in Russia. Inside of their graves, researchers uncovered battle axes, a spear, a collection of arrowheads, and a whole lot of skeletons. According to researchers, this was a very exceptional find. A necropolis like this hasn't been uncovered in nearly 3 decades. The Fatyanovo culture appeared around 2900 BC and thrived in the beautiful Russian forest for about 900 years. Judging by the placement of the stone axe inside of the burials, scientists believe these people originated from places in Eastern Europe, like Poland or Belarus, where those kinds of customs were common. Oddly enough, it was the arrival of these people in the virgin forests of Russia that marked the beginning of the Bronze Age, as they began to breed cattle, master agriculture, and work with copper and bronze. However, this was still a very long time ago, and it's difficult for scientists to locate evidence of the Fatyanovo culture, as they usually made their graves in the sandy soil where nothing stays preserved for thousands of years. Strange hole in a bear skull. A very strange skull was recently found dating back 35,000 years. The skull belongs to a cave bear from the Ice Age. This was a massive creature that roamed much of the Russian tundra before eventually going extinct when the Ice Age ended. But what makes this skull so strange is that there is a mysterious hole right in the back of its head that looks suspiciously like a hole made by a spear. Nobody can say for certain what made the hole in the back of the bear's skull, but if it was a spear, it would be the earliest example ever documented of a cave bear being hunted by human beings. Right now, scientists think the bear was killed while it was hibernating. This would make sense, seeing as the hole was in the back of its skull. Somebody must have snuck up on it, killed it, then hauled it away to skin and eat. The only issue here is that there are other things that can make holes in skulls. Researchers from Ural Federal University found the skull in the Imane cave in the Ural Mountains, but they found no evidence of a spear nearby. The bear could have cracked its head on something. Or the hole in the skull could have been caused by water dripping on the back of the skull for thousands of years as it sat in the cave. It's hard to say for sure, but what we do know is that living 35,000 years ago amongst cave bears and mammoth bones for shelter in freezing temperatures sounds extremely scary. Holes in the ground. There are some very large holes appearing in the Siberian tundra, and people are getting pretty worried. Beginning in 2020 and carrying through to 2021, scientists have investigated several giant craters found mysteriously in the middle of nowhere, looking like giant holes where worm monsters are burying deep into the earth. Some of the craters are up to 100 feet deep and 60 feet wide, with each of them being perfectly circular. At first, scientists didn't understand this. How does a hole explode in the middle of the Siberian tundra for no reason? But as it turns out, there is a reason. Scientists say the holes have been the result of a buildup of methane gas. As Russia records its hottest year in modern history, the permafrost is melting. This means that methane is escaping the ground in huge quantities. When the methane escapes too quickly, it creates a bubble. That bubble explodes, blowing a crater like a pit to hell in the earth. You just better hope nobody's standing at that exact spot when it happens. They'd honestly be better off fighting a grenade. The Russian connection. A new study has revealed the oldest link between the Native Americans and their ancestors from the other side of the world. While archaeologists were excavating a small site near Lake Baikal, close to the border of Mongolia, they recovered some ancient relics, including reindeer bones, tools made of bone, and a small piece of a human tooth. Then, archaeologist Svetlana Schneider with the Russian Academy of Sciences brought the tooth in for evaluation. After DNA testing, the team discovered that the tooth dates back 14,000 years. They then dug deeper and checked out the genome of the individual that the tooth belonged to. This person was a man, and the scientists were shocked to see that he shared a common ancestry with the Native Americans of today, as well as Eurasians and East Asians. As of now, that makes this man the oldest known relative to Native Americans living in modern Canada and the United States. This has a few interesting implications. It means that the population from which the Native Americans emerged occupied an enormous region of Eurasia, meaning many parts of China, Mongolia, Russia, and Kazakhstan. Then, for a reason still unknown to scientists, some of them crossed from Siberia into Canada using the Bering Strait, effectively separating themselves from the rest of the world for over 10,000 years. Sea monster. A mysterious sea monster has washed up on a Russian beach, and nobody has any idea what it is. At least nobody knew in the beginning. The issue here is that the Russian sea monster looked like a weird cross between a crocodile and a dead whale. It had a skull like some kind of crocodilian, with sharp teeth and powerful jaws, but it also seemed to be covered in a gross black fur. Its body was about 20 feet long and mostly skeletal. It was allegedly found by a group of soldiers posted on the island of Sakhalin in eastern Russia, near the border of Japan. The monster freaked out the local population so much that the soldiers took the carcass away 8 years ago to have it tested. They needed to know if this was a real creature or a freaky sea monster. Finally, after all this time, we have answers, and it turned out to be the remains of a poor beluga whale and not a mythical sea beast. Still, it was creepy enough to warrant an investigation. The Peebles Horde. In Scotland, a group of friends decided to investigate a random field near the small town of Peebles using metal detectors. Not long after they got started, Marius Stephen uncovered a strange bronze object buried under nearly 2 feet of dirt. but his metal detector kept on beeping, signaling that there was more treasure to be found just under his feet. The guys immediately knew they had found something awesome. They called the Treasure Trove Unit, a team of archaeologists that specialize in local discoveries. What started as a fun day of treasure hunting turned into an excavation that went on for almost a month. The treasure uncovered is now known as the Peebles Horde, and it includes some of the most valuable archaeological artifacts ever discovered in Scotland. These objects date back 3,000 years. The archaeologists found an ancient sword still sheathed in its scabbard, the wheel axle from a chariot, and a full horse harness that had probably been used by the horse that pulled the chariot. There was also an ornamental rattle pendant that adorned the harness, which is one of just 3 of its kind found in the United Kingdom, and the first ever in Scotland. The hoard was announced as a nationally significant find because very few Bronze Age hoards have been found in Scotland. The soil had just the right components in it to preserve wood and leather materials for thousands of years, even things like the leather straps for the horse harness. However, nobody is sure exactly who left all the treasures behind. Since it was so complex, the entire hoard had to be lifted as a block and taken apart one artifact at a time. As for how much the treasure is worth, we can only guess on that, but it's probably many millions of dollars. Shipwrecked Coins. A gang of treasure hunters in Florida found a very valuable cache of ancient coins from a sunken shipwreck. The ship was part of a fleet of Spanish vessels that sunk off the coast of Florida way back in the year 1715. The treasure hunters found 22 silver coins that have been estimated to be worth about $6,000. That's not too bad for a day of treasure hunting. Plus, the treasure hunters didn't even need to dive down to a shipwreck to find them. They uncovered the coins after they washed up on a beach following a brutal storm that moved over the Gulf of Mexico in February. The winds reached top speeds of up to 40 miles per hour, along with waves that were 13 feet tall. During the storm, the coins must have gotten swept off the bottom of the sea and deposited on the sandy shore. The friends were well aware of the potential treasure after a storm like that, as they have found things before following a night of wind and rain, such as ancient belt buckles, pieces of porcelain, and other random artifacts from the 1700s. This time, they found artifacts that actually made them a bit of money. The ship the coins came from sank during a hurricane. According to Smithsonian Magazine, the ship was part of a larger fleet carrying trade goods from Cuba back home to Spain. Only a single vessel escaped the storm fully intact. The rest were either heavily damaged or sank in the ocean. Cosmic Pearls. Researchers in Sarasota County came across something absolutely bizarre while looking through fossilized clams on the beach. Mike Meyer, a university student from South Florida, was doing fieldwork with a friend of his, looking for evidence of Florida's great geological history. They were collecting clams that had been fossilized for millions of years, and then cracking them open to see what was inside. That was when they found a collection of cosmic pearls. The pearls are very small, not even as big as a grain of salt. Each translucent ball looks like a bead of glass. However, after the students took the beads back to the lab for analysis, they discovered them to be microtectites, very small particles that form when an object from space impacts the atmosphere and explodes, sending molten gunk falling through the sky. By the time the molten gunk touches down, it has turned into beads of crystal. After making the discovery, Mike kept on looking anyway. He ended up collecting 83 of these cosmic pearls and keeping them in a small box for over 10 years. Further analysis proved that the spheres contained traces of exotic metals from outer space. How exactly they got into the clams is still a bit of a mystery, as is how much money the pearls could be worth. They have no monetary value at the moment, but in the future, having 83 pearls that literally came from space could prove to make Mike a very rich scientist. Inuit artwork in Detroit. Some very valuable Inuit treasure has been discovered in a rundown old house in Detroit, of all places. Nobody would ever expect to find a literal hoard of extremely valuable Inuit artwork inside of a dilapidated house that was left abandoned. The discovery came after a pair of professional house flippers purchased the property. They bought the decrepit old place, which had been sitting empty for years after the owner passed away. The family of the deceased sold the house, including all the contents inside. When the buyers went in to take a look around, they found 40 prints, 24 of which were originals and signed by famous Inuit artists. The pieces of artwork came from the Canadian territory of Nunavut, the coldest and remotest place in all of North America. Keep in mind that these paintings aren't that old, but their significance and monetary value is exceptional. The artwork is beautiful, created by artists living in the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative on the southern tip of Baffin Island, basically at the end of the Earth. Each piece of artwork sells for thousands of dollars, with one of the more popular pieces being sold recently at an auction for $216,000. Either the person who had owned the house previously didn't know what the paintings were or forgot about them. Nobody even knows how the old owner got their hands on Inuit artwork from a world away. But luckily for the house flippers, they're basically set for life. Maya gold orbs. Archaeologists in Mexico discovered some strange golden artifacts underneath the ancient pyramid in the archaeological site of Teotihuacan. This was the old Aztec capital located just a few miles outside of Mexico City. A mysterious tunnel was found stretching underneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. In order to search the underground tunnel safely, archaeologists used a robotic probe equipped with infrared technology. They were hoping to find some amazing new artifacts that could shed more light on the ancient Aztec people. It was about 250 feet deep into the underground tunnels that the probe found something unusual. There were what appeared to be thousands of glints of light flashing in the darkness. Upon closer inspection, the archaeologists realized they were looking at a pile of golden orbs. Nobody knew what these things were. Later analysis showed the orbs were made of clay and wrapped in special gold foil. The gold balls are so weird that archaeologists barely have any theories as to what they were used for. However, they do believe the underground tunnels were probably utilized as a sort of ritual space where priests traveled between the living and the dead, and human beings were sacrificed. This would suggest the precious golden orbs were used as a part of sacrificial rituals, but how exactly they were used and just how valuable they were to the ancient Aztecs is still a mystery. What do you think they could have been for? Let me know in the comments below. Black Death coins. A metal detectorist in England has uncovered two extremely rare and very valuable gold coins. Treasure hunters with metal detectors find coins all the time, but these two are exceptional and unique. This is mainly because they come from the days of the Black Death. The coins date back to the 14th century, when the plague began to sweep across Europe. Each coin has the image of Edward III on it, the English king who attempted to introduce gold coins to England back in the year 1344. The first attempt was a failure. The coins actually proved too valuable, and it was a big fiasco. The king tried again later and issued new coins from between 1344 and 1351. These coins worked out much better. This is the other reason why the coins are so valuable. They were minted during the first decade in English history where people could actually use gold coins for trade. It would be like having one of the first dollar bills ever printed. The only damage the coins have is that they are a bit folded. They look a little like tacos. However, each coin is 96% pure gold. This is literal treasure, nearly 700 years old. Back in the day, each coin was worth roughly $8,350 in today's currency. The two coins together in your pocket would have been the equivalent of carrying $16,700 in bills or poker chips. Today, the coins are likely worth significantly more. Nobody knows how much they may earn at an auction, but the guy who found them will probably have enough hard cash for a nice new sports car. What would you do with this kind of money? Let me know in the comments below. 19th century sword. A woman in Plymouth, Massachusetts was digging in her backyard when she found an unexpected treasure. She was digging with her shovel when she heard the click of metal on metal. Carrie Hadaway then dug up a fencing sword from the 19th century. Blown away by the random discovery, she took the artifact to a local researcher, who then told her the sword was probably crafted by a local blacksmith over 150 years ago. It's not clear how much she can get for the ancient sword at auction, but it's likely worth a pretty penny. Even more amazing is that after the discovery, Carrie went a little overboard on her home excavations. She began digging all through her yard and was flabbergasted by what she found. She turned up arrowheads, fossils of random animals she couldn't identify, and what she believes to be stone tools. It turns out Carrie's house is a treasure trove of ancient artifacts, most of which she's hoping to put on display at a local museum. Constantine's Finger. The finger of Constantine the Great was discovered sitting inside of storage at the Louvre Museum in Paris. This was not Constantine's real physical finger. Instead, it belonged to a huge statue of Constantine housed inside the Capitoline Museum in Rome, originally built in 1584 and placed on top of a column in Old Rome. This statue consists of a giant head and one of the emperor's hands, of course, minus a finger. The statue had been missing its finger for over 500 years. But how did the hand and the finger get separated? And why did it take so long for researchers to realize what had happened? Back in 1913, years after the ancient artifact was gifted to the museum by an Italian banker in 1863, a man who until his death had possessed one of the biggest collections in the world of Roman antiques, the finger was accidentally categorized as a toe. Nobody knew whose toe it was, and so the giant thing was just kind of stuck away and forgotten about. It wasn't until 2018 that researcher Aurelia Azima realized the connection. After a bit of back and forth between the museums, the finger was finally shipped to Rome and reattached to the 39-foot statue using a non-invasive method. It turned out to be one of the most valuable fingers in archaeological history. Pub coins. After 10 long years of hunting for treasure in his spare time, endlessly plodding along with his metal detector just hoping to find something valuable, Luke Mahoney finally hit the jackpot. He found the biggest hoard of his life in a field outside his local pub. The treasure collection boasted more than 1,000 silver coins, an impressive find thought to be worth over $100,000. Luke runs his very own metal detector shop near the very same pub by which he made the discovery. After 10 years of hunting randomly, he decided to check what was essentially his own backyard, and that paid off big time. The coins he found date back to between the 15th and 16th centuries. Based on what the experts told him, the coins were likely buried by a local landowner who went to fight in the Civil War and never came back. His riches remained in the ground for around 400 years. Now, Luke will likely split the profits with the pub owner, seeing as the coins were found on his land. Either way they split it, both guys are about to be rich. The Golden Hands. The ancient Chimu culture prospered on the northern coast of Peru between 900 and 1460 AD. They ruled about 620 miles of Peruvian coastline and were eventually beaten and wiped out by the more powerful Inca civilization, only 60 years before the Spanish landed and wiped out the Inca. Too bad they hadn't worked together. In any case, the Chimu people left behind some very amazing archaeological wonders. Their capital city of Chan Chan is a hotspot for valuable archaeological relics. The city was likely once the greatest in all of South America. The Chimu excelled at engineering, even creating a hydraulic canal irrigation system, learning how to fashion complex things out of metal, and making some of the most impressive golden treasures. One of these treasures is a pair of golden hands uncovered during an excavation. Researchers don't know what exactly these hands were used for. Some speculate they may have been props in an elaborate ritual, where a shaman would use the hands to touch sacred objects, or perhaps they were meant to represent the hands of the gods themselves. The hands appear to have been made out of pure gold, making their historical and monetary value immeasurable. The hands are currently housed in Peru's Gold Museum, safely out of reach of greedy thieves, hopefully. Caves of Baja. In India, there is an expressway that connects the cities of Pune and Mumbai. It's traveled by hundreds of people every day, just as it has been for 2,000 years. This modern expressway began as an ancient road beaten into the dirt. Nearby is a group of 22 caves carved out of the rock, dating back to the 2nd century BC. These temples inside caves are now what remains of an ancient Buddhist society. One of the most iconic pieces of this old trade road is the Murgat, a passage carved through the mountain that allowed swift travel to the Konkan coast for merchants and caravans. The caves carved throughout the mountain pass were made by those travelers and merchants carrying goods to coastal ports. At first, everyone thought these caves were built by monks who wanted to isolate themselves from the outside world. But a historian realized that these cave complexes were always along trade routes, so it made more sense for the merchants to pay for the caves for the monks, and then they would always have a protected place to stay. The monks had a large prayer hall with 27 pillars and wooden beams on the ceiling they put up over 2,000 years ago that's still there today. It was a pretty dangerous journey for merchants to take, always in danger of being attacked by wild animals or bands of thieves. By paying for the construction and upkeep of dozens of cave monasteries, the merchants believed they would be granted safe passage. Later on, a fort was built above the monastery caves to protect the monks and the strategic pass. Mesa Verde and the Cliff People. Mesa Verde is arguably the most mysterious archaeological location anywhere above the Mexican border. But this isn't just one site. The Mesa Verde National Park boasts over 4,700 archaeological sites, including upwards of 600 ancient cliff dwellings that were constructed by the ancestral Puebloans between 550 AD and 1300 AD. They lived in the cliffs and canyons of the Four Corners region of the United States for 700 years, flourishing as an advanced culture unparalleled anywhere in the area. But the reason the people of Mesa Verde are such a mystery is that one day, for seemingly no reason, they picked up and left. In the 1200s, over the course of a single generation, every last person living in the expansive cliff dwellings left their ancestral home behind and fled. To this day, historians and archaeologists have no idea where they went or why they abandoned their homes. Their best guess is that people began migrating into New Mexico and Arizona, and possibly even deeper into Mexico because of severe drought. But why they would abandon such an impressive kingdom is really unknown. Their cliff dwellings were truly great feats of engineering. Some of them had up to 150 rooms and space for farming carved beneath the overhanging cliffs. Even today, their ruins are still amazing and visited by many every year. Have you ever been here? Let me know in the comments below. Mycenaean Palace of Kaidonia. Ancient Kaidonia on the island of Crete was the seat of power for the Minoan civilization, which of course prospered even before the Greeks came along. It is an archaeological site of great significance and confusion. The confusion comes because of a child's skeleton that was discovered with evidence of knife wounds, suggesting the child had been cannibalized. However, recent interpretations have revealed something so shocking that the events could probably be turned into a dramatic series. The ancient Minoans practiced sacrifice. It didn't happen very often, but it was something they would do when their civilization came under hard times. In general, they would sacrifice a young virgin to appease whichever gods they were worshipping at the time. The bones of the young girl found at the palace in Kaidonia are proof of this type of barbaric behavior. After significant research, dating the bones, and interpreting what had happened back in the 13th century BC, archaeologists were able to figure out why the child had been sacrificed. First, there was a great disaster, an earthquake that probably had a magnitude of between 6.5 and 7.5. It destroyed much of the Minoans' capital on the island of Crete. Of course, they assumed the earthquake was the result of an angry god, so they removed parts of the palace floor, sacrificed a virgin, 43 sheep, 4 pigs, and an ox to appease whatever deity was angry with them. Thousands of years later, archaeologists found all of these bones hidden underneath the ruins of the palace. Lost Imperial Home. Near the small city of Nara in Japan, the impossibly massive ruins of an old imperial house have recently been uncovered. It's one of the largest ruins to be excavated in Japan in recent years. It was found at the old site of the Heijo-Kaiyo Palace, in what was once the old capital of Japan. Not everything has been excavated here just yet, but what archaeologists say is that what they have found was probably the centerpiece of the residence where the rulers of Japan lived during the 8th century. One of the experts believes the building was probably the residence for Empress Koken, who ruled from between 718 and 770. She was at the forefront of what is known as the Nara period, from 710 to 784. So far, archaeologists have only managed to reveal a single building supported by pillars. This was Empress Koken's living space. She was the 48th monarch of Japan, involved in an affair with a high priest named Dokyo. Dokyo was appointed grand minister and then later priestly emperor. When Empress Koken died in 770, he tried to ascend the throne himself, but that didn't go so well. And shortly after, Nara was abandoned as the capital. What's really interesting is that Empress Koken wasn't even the first female ruler of Japan. She was the 6th, and this was back in the 700s, over 1,300 years ago. There were 2 more women who would become the empress before the men got together and quashed female rulers once and for all in Japan. The Labyrinth of the Coliseum. The Coliseum in Rome is one of the most iconic pieces of architecture anywhere on the planet. But this ancient wonder is just as fascinating below as it is from the outside. Beneath the floor of the Coliseum is a labyrinth, which was hidden beneath a wooden floor for the 500 years that the arena was used in blood combat. Starting in 80 AD, the labyrinth was used for all kinds of behind-the-scenes action. But nobody knew what action this was until just recently, when a German archaeologist deciphered the intricacies of the labyrinth after studying it for 14 years. The conclusion was that the labyrinth was used frequently for animals. For example, workmen would raise cages with bears, lions, or even leopards from the labyrinth up into the Coliseum, where gladiators and slaves would be forced to fight them for the joy of the spectators. But here's something you probably don't know. After the glory of Rome came to an abrupt end, the meaning of the Coliseum was gradually lost. Throughout the following centuries, the labyrinth beneath the floor of the amphitheater was used by vagrants. The Coliseum itself became populated by blacksmiths and glue makers. The residents of Rome began believing in local legends about what the Coliseum had once been used for. Nobody even knew it had been for gladiator battles. They thought it was an old temple dedicated to the sun. It even ended up being the preferred location for necromancers, who went to the Coliseum at night to try and summon demons. In the 16th century, the Pope even tried to turn the Coliseum into a wool factory. Murgat Dolmen site. The site of Murgat in Jordan is one of mystery and intrigue. The site consists of over 100 stone monoliths spread throughout the countryside in the absolute middle of nowhere. Some call it the Jordanian Stonehenge. It's a unique site for many reasons, and scientists are still trying to figure out what it was used for. Here, archaeologists have discovered ancient cultic buildings, stone megaliths called dolmens, kind of like Stonehenge, and traces of ancient settlements. This is all a bit strange because in the ancient world, places of ritual importance were not usually constructed near settlements at all. Standing stones were more religious centers, and you wouldn't really have dwellings nearby. These were often places of great magic and rituals and were found far from civilization. In this case, Suzanne Kerner, the director of excavations for the site, says that the rock structures may have been used as burial sites. There are about 122 dolmens in the desert here, with some consisting of a small entrance, a floor of stone, 2 walls of stone, and a capstone for a ceiling. Buried underneath the rock are undoubtedly the remains of the dead. All the different features of the landscape here were created during the earliest part of the Bronze Age, around 5,000 years ago. The structures, the stones, the dolmens, and the entire site may have had something to do with burials, perhaps even a cult of the dead. Ancient knife. Colonial Mackinac is one of the most interesting archaeological sites in the United States. Just recently, an excavation at this ancient Michigan fortress turned up a new piece of treasure. While digging deep in an old cellar, archaeologists found a very old and very worn pocket knife that, if you didn't know any better, looks like a chicken nugget. According to the curator of archaeology for Mackinac State Historic Parks, the exact age of the knife is unknown, but the clasp knife, as it is known, can hopefully be restored to its former glory. But the knife is only the most recent in a long string of interesting archaeological discoveries at the colonial fort in Mackinac City, an old settlement from the 18th century that is slowly being reconstructed. This was one of the first places in Michigan to be inhabited by settlers. Back in the 18th century, it was more of a trading village for furs, occupied by Native American tribes, and later on the French. The exact history of the site isn't totally known, but archaeologists have been working for over 6 decades to uncover its secrets. So far, they've excavated about 1 million artifacts here. Included among the finds are brass sleeve buttons from 1769, a lead seal from 1717, and even a structural post from the original fort in 1715. Ancient ritual site in Mexico. A new ritual site has been uncovered in Mexico that is 8,000 years old. Archaeologists were shocked to discover this bizarre archaeological wonder in the state of Nuevo León. It had probably been built by the first people to settle Mexico and to interact with Ice Age animals that were going extinct, even as the settlers first started building their own villages. Here's what was found at the site: teeth, bones, skulls, and other scraps of animals such as mammoths, llamas, giant bison, and much more. Experts are saying the animals were probably used in unknown rituals by the first community in Mexico. Almost nothing remained of whatever structure had been built here, though there was obvious evidence that some rectangular stone pieces had been erected as part of a rocky shelter. This is the reason the site was named La Bóveda by archaeologists, otherwise known as the vault. Unfortunately, the archaeological site is so old that other than bones and a few pieces of stone, nothing else has been found. Archaeologists can't even guess at what kind of rituals were conducted by these ancient people, or what gods they may have worshipped. Sunken shipwreck. A new archaeological site has been located in a rather unusual place. At the bottom of the sea, off the coast of Greece, underwater archaeologists found an ancient shipwreck with a hoard of treasures. The ship crashed near the Greek island of Kos sometime in the 3rd century AD. It's not clear how the vessel ended up sinking. There were actually 4 of them found very close together, suggesting it was a treacherous area for seafarers back during that time. However, the other ships were dated back over millennia, between the 5th century BC and modern times, so the area has pretty much always been dangerous. There were all kinds of treasures found in the shipwrecks scattered across the seafloor. It was mostly Roman pottery, a type of container called amphorae. These things were used to hold precious olive oil and wine. Archaeologists discovered amphorae filled with oil that had been produced in several different places, including both Spain and Africa. It was probably being transported back to Greece or even as far as Asia when disaster struck. New theory of the Nazca lines. The Nazca lines in Peru are nothing short of fascinating. These huge geoglyphs were etched into the desert ground thousands of years ago, and ever since their discovery in modern times, they have been the source of great mystery. New information and studies are being released all the time. Some claim the lines were part of an ancient labyrinth, some say they were designed to mimic the constellations, and some others even say the lines trace the route of a subterranean water system. According to new research, scientists say the Nazca lines may have been used like a map to direct ancient people to temple sites across the area. The first lines were probably used to mark the route which pilgrims would take to reach the temples where they worshipped their old gods. However, researchers also say that the purpose of the lines may have changed as generations went by, and that they were probably used by several different groups of people for different things. There are a lot more geoglyphs here than people realize. Between the Andes Mountains and the coast, spread across the desert, there are at least 1,000 geoglyphs created between the years 200 BC and 600 AD. Besides straight lines in the dirt, there are also weird creatures and normal animals like dogs and monkeys. Some of these supernatural beings are so odd that scientists haven't been able to identify them. What's really strange is that if the lines really do lead to ancient temple sites, they haven't actually been discovered. It's possible the temples could have been destroyed or simply deteriorated as time went by. Right now, scientists are still trying to make the theory work. Thanks for watching! Which of these incredible sites would you like to visit? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. See you soon! Bye!